Hey folks, we're here on a Monday, beautiful Monday, close to a chaotic part of the year for us folks who work in academic spaces. So we're here taking a poetry flowetry break, and I'm here with McTate Stroman II. And as much as I too am a second, there's something about that little power and that parallel flow that we got going on. So thank you for showing up here with me. I know Mondays can be chaos.
Yes. Thank you for having me, Rosanna. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And these are really low key, just forces me to take a break, and I get to hang out with some awesome folks who write and flow poetically. And sometimes we rhyme and sometimes we don't, but we definitely always kind of have this vibe about us that people appreciate because we are an honest bunch. And the first time I met you, we're at Anza. And
Yes.
then when I got a few more kind of glimpses to what you do and how you flow was, I went to the poetry events on campus, but also on the radio. And you're like super smooth. And it's like that aspirational smooth, right? Where it's like, I wish I could vibe that smooth. And I wish I was a percussionist, but I'm, musician and dancer in other ways. So I feel like there's some parallel flow there, right? Where we come as our whole selves.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I'll let you introduce so I can handle whatever chaos is happening over here, disrupting my flow.
Most
But
definitely. Most definitely.
tell us about yourself a little bit.
Okay. Well, my name is McTate Stroman II. I am a spoken word artist, poet, percussionist, uh, educator. I, I like to look at myself artistically as a breakbeat poet. I am an original breakbeat poet. There's some breakbeat poets out there, and that's what we do. It's that blend from that hip hop generation, blending poetry and spoken word with it. So, yeah, that's who I am, and that's what I'm all about. It's blending those two things together, spoken word and hip hop from
And
that
there's
hip hop generation.
a wholeness about it. And I love how you vibe. And think one of the earlier poets I had was Lakeisha, and
Oh,
we were talking about Prince. And so you came on the chat thread, and I was like, yes, because you're one of those folks who it's like you vibe so smooth on the radio that I've told other folks, I'm like, what would happen when we'd be on those radio segments with the poetess Kalamu Shashe and the Bajaba Beats, KKUP, and the other one
yes,
I'll remember in a second, is that we get to hang out and we get to hear each other's poetry. We get to hear a little bit about why everybody writes and what they write. But
right.
I was always kind of there and like, oh, we got to be quiet in the background. And I have questions, and I'm like, oh, I wonder why he wrote that, or I wonder
Oh,
what,
good.
just wanting to pick your brain. And so here we are on a Monday, and we get to kind of just hang out low key.
Yes.
And I get to ask you all those questions that I couldn't ask in the radio booth. So I'm going to start us off with a little bit of what kicked off your curiosity. And that's, you know, nobody's perfect, but there's something magical about the ripple effects of creativity. And so I'm going to kick us off with Prince. And
Mm,
there's something about showing up fully, even
yes.
with your flaws. And I know some of his flaws were recently called out, and we're like, that's not a surprise, right? And
Mm,
so it's like, we're not perfect. And yet there's ripple effects of impact. And there's like some little twinkly magical vibe about when people show up fully as themselves, right?
right. Right. Prince, man, he's my go-to inspiration. Like when I really, from being the youngest person on a major label to get creative control. It means a lot to see written, produced, performed by, and it was interesting. Um, maybe 2 years back, I was at work. I work over at Evergreen, and it just hit me. I said, "Man, what if Prince worked a 9 to 5?" Like, wow, like, and realizing like ha- having to bottle up all that creativity, because if he worked a 9 to 5, he couldn't have created as much as he did, and just really having that feeling and understanding that creativity that he's about. Um, Adore. Um, when Two Are in Love, I love his ballads. His Emancipation album. Uh, Man, yeah, I know that we weren't necessarily supposed to be going down this Prince road,
Oh, right.
it's Prince is that guy, um, and very pure in that sense. My son's name is Christopher, and I'll on the my favorite Prince movie is Under the Cherry Moon,
Mm.
and Christopher Tracy. That's why my son's name is Christopher. And just, man, Prince is that guy. And yeah, please pick my brain. I love when people ask me questions about why I wrote what I wrote, because as a poet, we spend a lot of time thinking about our lines and our stanzas, and they mean something to us. So anytime that anyone wants to ask me any questions about what I wrote, I welcome that,
I
because
love it. See, and you're talking about your son being named after Under the Cherry Moon, and there's Chris there. And for the longest time, I was so upset because my parents didn't name my sister Apollonia. And I'm sure she's grateful as all heck because her name
right.
is Diana. But I was like, oh, she could have been Apollonia. We could have called you Apple. And it's for me that example of showing up and doing the thing. And there's a few Prince isms that I throw out there. And one is reminding me of everything you just said. What if you had a 9 to 5? What would that look like? I don't know if you've written that poem yet, but I would love to hear that in the form of a poem because it's a curious thing to imagine, right? And I feel like I'm always trying to reconfigure my life against the confines of a 9 to 5, not because I don't work hard. I know I'm going to put in hella hustle. And it's with that sense of I got to engage in this work fully as myself and not in this box of expectation. And I think that poets kind of do that in a lot of ways. We defy that traditional form of an essay or, poets of color in particular. We're playful in a lot of ways, in the serious sense and in the, playful tinkering sense. And so the other Princeism that comes to mind is like I like to say, imagine what we'd all be like in our own game. And I caught that like on the tail end of one of his little awards acceptance speeches or something. And he was like, imagine what we'd all be like in our own game. And I was like, damn, that's what I'm trying to do. And, kind of coming back to that every so often, it's always like, yeah, you can get those 9 to 5s. You can get those full-time gigs because we shouldn't be having a piecemeal to be creative.
Right.
It kind of attaches to that other Princeism, which is like, you just got to keep the lights on. Right. And I'm like, look at all the crap he did, just keeping the lights on and all the magic that was made, just keeping the lights on. And there's always extra when it's like, all right, I just got to keep the lights on. And then stuff flows. Right. And that is poetry.
Right.
So that brings me to you and your poetry, because there is a byproduct. There's ripple effects. And if I'm being completely honest, I'm like, no, the first time I met you was at the Euphrat before I actually met you because a student painted you on this big old and I was like, who this fool?
Right.
And brilliant, beautiful soul of a person, right? Vibing super poetically. And so I don't want to force you to throw down a first poem, but I think there's something about how you flow in your poetry that speaks for itself. So if you're ready, we can jump right in. And if you're not, you can be like, ease up, lady, ease up.
No, I'm very ready. I'm a poet. I stay ready. It's funny about that Euphrat, that painting. I would go visit my paintings on my lunch break.
I love it.
I don't take myself too seriously, but it was. I really appreciated that. And so what I'm gonna share with you is a poem that back in the day when I was getting started in poetry. I mentioned my son Christopher. I got started in '93 when he was born. Coming out of being a wanting to be in hip hop and a hip hop artist, and I didn't find that to be conducive to being a father,
Mm.
and being committed at the time to his mother. And then, so with doing so, I wanted to get into poetry. And so I found the world stage in Leimert Park in Los Angeles. A friend of mine's mother told me, if you're really serious into poetry, they have this workshop, the Anesi Artist Workshop in Leimert Park. So I went there. And so one of the first poems I wrote was this one, and it's my signature piece. And I like to do it every time I enter a new stage. And it was called Born to be Deep. You see, I was born to be deep, but converse quite simple. I stay alive and I strive as long as fluids in the temple. To create and meditate in the hills where the wind speaks, through the valleys and peaks. Oh Lord, let me dig deep into the earth for the birth of new wisdom, to project intellect and manifest charisma, to flow and make sound pound like a congetto, to commit with the mind in due time, the rest shall follow. Because you see, it's poetry I use, once influenced by Langston Hughes, short stories by Leroy Jones, Amari Baraka. You see, it all depends on my mood. It all depends on the mood. So that's that one, Born to be Deep.
And again, speaks for itself. Even the title, Born to be Deep, and I'm wondering if how many times you've been called a deep thinker, or, that's hella deep, and you hear it all the time. And there's some introspection for sure.
Right.
And I think what I appreciate about you is that it defies the stereotype of what people think deep folks are supposed to exist like. Does that make sense?
Right.
We're supposed to
Right.
be introverted, and so and think to a certain degree we are, but I know I'm a ham for the microphone, and I'm like, I see a microphone, somebody wants to give it to me, it's going to be a struggle for me to give it back. I know how to share it, but I love the microphone.
Right. And that's what that is, that Born to be Deep, because it's like, I was born to be deep, but converse quite simple. It's like, being deep is something for the self, introspective. And when it's time to communicate and converse with other people, you like to run into other deep individuals, but we all know that's far, few, and in between. So we really embrace, right, when we're together. But when dealing with everyone else, you realize that they may not have gone on that journey, and so it's still being able to have it's like poetry, it's like poetry to hip hop to me. It's like that deep side. Not everybody's going to dig it. Some people think it's a little too esoteric, or it's too eclectic, or you dressing kind of funny. Like, nah, like, but I can still chill with you, but I'm gonna be me. I'm gonna be me.
And there's something about leading by example without trying to lead, right? Just showing up like you.
Right.
And there's a lightness there, right? And not in the hokey sense of like, oh, there's love and light. I mean, but there kind of is, there kind of is in that Prince vibe kind of way.
It is. And then that's the thing about Prince. Like, man, like people don't understand like his essence. Like, you look at him and you go, wow, he's so feminine. He dresses like this. And it's like I was a couple months ago, I was looking at a new release that they have of his, where, so songs that he wrote and he was singing them. So they were like demo tapes. And of course I know that he was the pen behind the Time. Right. And one of my Time songs that I really enjoyed is Gigolos Get Lonely Too. And then to hear him singing it and going, yes, of course that would be him. And, and like I said, Under the Cherry Moon is my favorite movie. And please don't get it twisted. This man loved women, and he had a way with his words and his ballads. So it's that juxtaposition, going back to being deep. Sometimes it's, people don't understand your deepness, but to be misunderstood is not detrimental,
Yeah. And sometimes it's like we're leaving a trail of how much we're misunderstanding ourselves in the process. And
Mhm.
we're kind of uh, generous with it. And it's not generous like, hey, I have this thing for you, but it's like, open access. There's something about letting people see you fully with all your smoothness and then with the flaws, right? That
Right,
just does something poetic in our collective existence. And
right, right.
it's
It's how
that
you
conversation.
stumble.
Yeah.
Yes, it's how you stumble. I think I fall very poetically, you know,
Mhm.
and stumble that way. Yeah, that's the beauty. That's the beauty of it all. Is that introspection, that searching for self, and finding what's inside, finding what's inside. You know.
Yeah. And sometimes, what's funny is I was thinking this morning about other stuff. I mean, it's like I can't stop thinking. I wish I could turn the brain off. I'll be like brushing my teeth and I'm like, oh my God, somebody give me a pencil. Taking a shower and I'm like, I need to write this poem. I need to hurry the hell up and rinse all this greñero out because that's a lot of hair. Um, and it's just that urgency sometimes of when those words come to you
Mm,
and trying to capture them when they're like your cadence is super smooth and very, a lot of the poems I hear you share are kind of like they force you to slow down. And I'm not saying that's the case of for all of your poems, but the ones that I've heard are very just smooth and slow, and it's almost like, damn, I got to slow down my breathing when I'm listening to them, and they're a welcome meditation in that way.
yes. Yes.
But I don't know if for you, like, the words come with this bigger sense of urgency, or if your process is a little bit slower where you're like, they're gonna flow and they're gonna flow. And mine's a little bit more of a mashup. Sometimes I can flow, but most times I'm like chicken scratch, I'll figure it out later, but these words are they're ripe and ready, and if I don't catch them, they're gonna run away.
Right. They come at me quickly. They don't come at me as slow. And of course, like you, for me, I get up, and in the morning, that's the like coming out of a dream. I might get a line or two, and that's typically how they come, a line or two. And it's funny, my voice, my inner voice is very slow and regal. It's I can't pinpoint the location of it, but it's kind of it's this kind of a slow, regal type of sound that I hear. So when I put these words, these mashups of lines, and then now it's time for me to tell it,
Mm,
then it becomes that voice. Um, and I think a lot of it comes from when, like I said, coming out of hip hop. I remember even before I got right into poetry, I used to want, I felt like the music would really muddle the words. Like I want people to hear it, and back in the 90s, it was all about rewind, pressing the rewind button. Oh, did you that catch that? Rewind it.
yeah.
And then doing talent shows, I realized that we don't get a rewind.
Mm,
They get that one time, and we didn't have cameras a lot back then.
right.
So I was really wanting to make sure that I can make sure the audience got what I was trying to say that first
Mm,
time. And it became very conversational. And I must say, I did get into Toastmasters also. So I wanted to be very conversational. And one of the big things for me as an artist with Toastmasters, what I worked on is how to blend a poem into a speech. I never
mm,
wanted to be the guy that goes, and now I'm going to say a poem. I'm going to sneak it in there. And,
right.
the audience will go, wait a minute, is that line starting to rhyme with the other line? Like,
Right.
so I wanted it to, so I worked very hard at making sure that those two things flowed together so that they're that seamless. So that's, I feel like a lot of my slow delivery and intent is that I got a lot of that from Toastmasters and really doing speeches and wanting to bring that home. I really, really like, and I feel like becomes coming out of music and being a percussionist, it's like, how do you make your words do those things? Like, how can I really almost create a groove with just my words, you know? Um,
Definitely.
and that's what I really work on and work with.
And I love that, right? There's a power in slowing it down intentionally. And I want to take us back to how you described falling poetically, because
Mhm.
that's where this morning's string and stream of thoughts was about this idea that we learn that when you fall, you better dust yourself off and get back up and keep going.
Right.
And I don't know how many times I've fallen where I just linger there and I'm like, I just fell. And sometimes I'll laugh and everybody's like, what? You just fell. Are you okay? I am more than fine. And there are times where I'll fall and my body just if I let go and I'm like, I'm gonna just accept that I'm falling, then it's like up I go like a springing up like a cheerleader, stuff I didn't, realize I had that ability to spring back. But there's something about letting go in the fall
Right.
and lingering in it, like the literal falling itself, that just this morning was hitting on some poetic kind of threads that wanted to get strung together
Right.
and that wanted me to spend time, just how you captured it in that simple two-word phrase, falling poetically.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a beauty in that. It's like I've always, you see the worst falls are the ones when people try to deny it. Like, let it go. Just let it go. Just go with it. Roll with it. Allow gravity to be what it is. And like you said, you find that you can do some things that you weren't aware that you could do. I didn't know I was going to roll out of that like that.
Nope.
And it's taking it's taking the non perfection, being perfectly imperfected, um, and going with that, even in cadence, like you allow it to kind of fall. Like I'm into, hip hop, like I said. So b-boying, the fact that breaking is going to be in the Olympics. I mean, I'm out. You got me working out like, man, I want to at least get my last windmill in before it's all said and done. And thinking about the drunken monk, you know, hip
Mm,
hop and breaking, we go into kung fu. I know I'm going many places,
go for
but
it.
it's when you see the drunken monk style, like he is constantly off balance, but balanced, you know. Uh those are the most poetic things about it. And like you said, we learn so much from our quote unquote failures.
Right.
It's not quite a failure until if you unless only if you give up. It's like a poem. We write a line and we go back to revise, and it's like, oh, I found something in that. Oh, I didn't think it would take me there. And I like free verse myself.
Mhm.
I write, Langston Hughes is one of my favorite poets, and writing in free verse and finding your way without having a roadmap, you know, is a beautiful practice. I used to love when I was going to San Jose State and we would have the bus pass. I would just take the bus and kind of what I would call, walking with God. And I would find so many things. Like my goal is just getting to school and then maybe even going to Deanza when I was working there,
Right.
taking that long trip and just watching life, you know, watching it, and seeing those things unfold and unravel. There's a beauty in just opening up and accepting, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And that there are all of these, for me, it feels like all these metaphors, all these symbols, synergies to be taken from literal things like falling, like taking a journey on the bus, like taking a road trip and the circular pieces of that. Like there is so much inspiration to pull from in our everyday
Mhm.
that I don't ever feel like I'm gonna run out of material. And it never feels like I'm working with material. It just feels like I'm stringing a lot of things together that are gracing me with their presence. And I'm going to hopefully share that in conversation with other folks. And sometimes the conversation looks like the people get to find it and read it themselves. Sometimes it's we're sharing together on the radio or on the internet. Sometimes it's you're in a room with folks, right?
Right.
On the microphone or not. And I'm curious if for you, having been so intentional about integrating your speaking with your poetry, if it now kind of the byproduct of that is that you just kind of wax that way all the time. You know what I mean? Like you're helping someone out with financial aid and all of a sudden it's like this poetic flow and you've got this long line of that's that's the person I want to vibe with this very intense issue that can make or break their entire journey in that moment.
Uh, yeah, it's funny. I talk. Say it one more time.
I said no pressure in
Right,
your daily job. That just sounded
right,
way more intense.
right. Um, it's funny. I talk with my brother, and he says that I speak poetically, more often than not. And so that part, obviously, it there's a blend. It starts to blend. And one reason I started First Thursdays at Anza College is the marrying of those two things together. And actually, we're going on our 14th year. First Thursday will be held June 3rd, via Zoom, Deanza, and that allows me to bring those two worlds together. As far as financial aid and students, I know that always seemed like a very it makes students a little nervous. They're a little nervous about financial aid for many different reasons. It's one of the first times that our students receive that much money in a lump sum. Um, they if once they get to realize that this is their funds, sometimes it's hard for them to ask about their funds. They're not used to that, or so many different elements of financial aid I try to soften through making myself accessible. And yeah, I'm really don't I don't I'm glad that I don't have a time limit when it comes to speaking with students, because I really want to make sure that they get this information. I try to break it down so that they can walk away with as much knowledge as possible without giving them information overload. Let them know that you can always call me again. And so, yeah, those two worlds blend. And even in my educational journey, I always brought poetry with me. I started an event at Pasadena City College called Step Into the Cipher, and so I kept bringing that with me. So it's always been a part of me and will continue to be a part of me until my last breath. Definitely. My mother always told me, let no man write your epitaph. So it's the work that I do that creates that. Yeah. And I have lots of journals around, and get to writing those lines, and wearing different hats.
Yeah.
We wear different hats. We got to be the writer, we got to be the editor, got to be the presenter. You got to be a poet and a spoken word artist. I take that very seriously. I take Step Into the Mic very seriously. Understanding I had the ability to do the Comedy Store for about 5 years. We would do once a month, and knowing the difference between being on a Comedy Store stage versus being in a cafe versus being in a theater, really working and understanding that craft of it, and now I'm working on being more of a recording artist, and also looking to start publishing some poetry books. So I know how to perform. Now let me master these other elements as well.
Versatile in the spirit of Prince, right? And
Right.
that's the thing. I think that's why it resonates for both of us. And it's funny that you were like wearing many hats. And there was this urgency about finding, when you were like, use whatever picture you want for the flyer. And I was like, I'm going to put you in a hat because you're in a hat oftentimes when I see you. Right. And I love hats. And there's something I didn't realize in the moment, even poetic about that, like the symbolism, the symbology behind wearing many hats.
Right.
To be a poet in the world, and to feel like a liberated poet in the world who's writing our own epitaph as we go, those hats are critical. And a singular hat can morph and transform in so many ways. And I've seen, you do your thing, and it takes so much of the non-sexy part of the work to engage in that. And it takes a certain savviness and a certain willingness. Um, I don't know if self-promote is the right phrase,
Mm,
because sometimes the work speaks for itself.
mm, mm.
And so there's something that's tugging at me with that, like that piece of it in the conversation with you.
You know, that promotional piece is so it's so I started with my mother in the industry. We were in PR, so public relations, so understanding that. But the hard part is to do both, is to be the artist and try to promote, you know. Um, and I haven't mastered that part yet. I I can be honest and feel like I'm a very humble individual. I feel that. I feel like I can say that. But when it comes to my craft and then now promoting it, ah, it's like I done put in all this work. Like really, I'm gonna beg you to
Right.
check it out. Like it's very, it's that part is hard. And I think it is going to. I think I'm open myself up to inviting other people, you know, and love working with young students and seeing like, oh, there's somebody that's in marketing. You know, here, let me throw you a bone. Here, work with me. Let's, this will help with your portfolio, and this also helped me. It's really hard. I'm not the biggest when it comes to self promotion. I just dropped my first poetry spoken word album. When I say hip hop, and it's like I look and see what the numbers are. I'm constantly looking, but it's like, okay, I dropped this video. How much did that work towards people coming? I try to think back when people were putting together albums and their promotion. How did that work? How did they do it? Does controversy, going back to a Prince, does that work? And do I really want to utilize that? Do I want to be on TikTok? Do I, like, do I want them to take me serious? Do I, it's like all of these dances with it. And one thing that really resonated with me was somebody did bring up the fact that Picasso, Bob Marley, and other artists were not as big as they are today during their time.
Right.
And I'm kind of getting comfortable with that. Like I would much rather, because I'm not going to compromise my art.
Right.
I would much rather put my art out there, be as pure in my content, and let other people come to me, even if I'm not around to see it. That's fine. That's fine. And
Yeah.
that's why I have a 9 to 5.
And the follow-up question with that is, so did you self-produce your spoken word album?
I did. I
Yeah.
did for the most part. There's a couple tracks that I had some other producers come, but what I did with this project was it was kind of like that those performances that I did and I would ask people to come to and they didn't get a chance to, I recorded those. So a lot of those things are live recordings on there. I got a chance to perform at the Nuyorican Poets Cafe in New York. And that was awesome for me. And so I recorded that and took the audio out of that and put that on my project.
So,
Some of the tracks I've been really working on my production as well. And that honestly, that's what I was doing earlier today before I got on this, was just working on a few drum tracks, getting those things together. So that's what I love about poetry and being a poet, that I realized when I got started, is we didn't need a producer. You can't stifle us. You can't shut us down and be like, well, nope, I'm gonna silence your voice. Nope, we don't need. all I need is a pen and a pad. And sometimes all I need is a microphone. Sometimes all I need is my phone. So like really realize that the freedom in that, and that takes us back to Prince again. Prince really helped us realize, like, there's a freedom in this. This is, you want to be a slave or do you want to be free? And the implosion of the music industry, happening around that same time, like really, he really set the stage for us. If those are folks are really listening, where you have your own masters, like I own my own stuff, my album. I mean, I was always talking about making an album from since '93, so finally deciding, to do it now, because I didn't trust that one. For years I didn't trust that the industry knew how to market poetry and spoken word. I mean, it's proof positive. There's a guy, Reggie Gaines, was one of the first, and he was signed to Quincy Jones Quest Records back in the early '90s. Like they never understood how to market it, and I refused to, feel like my project was a flop. If I got a mean machine behind me and they putting up all that money, I'm gonna have to pay that back. I'm gonna be in debt. So no, I'll wait. I'll hold on till I can do it myself. And with this new age, all I need is a MacBook, and it's
Right.
ours for the taking. I could do everything I wanted to do in the '90s.
I love it. And that there's the timeline kind of wrote itself, right?
Yes.
Because I think I'm not gonna be like, let's throw your age out there, because
No.
I don't know. I don't care. But
I
I'm
don't.
like, senora status is what I like to tell my students. I'm like, I'm senora status. I could be your mom. And there's something about having a chance to look back on my life and some things that I thought I wanted for my life and for myself and for my family and community in the 90s, and seeing some of the integrity, but then some of that falling, right? Like what's the ripple effect of some of that falling and the fallout and where I've landed, over time. And I could never have planned this life for myself that I enjoy quite thoroughly, that I love, that I get to be creative and poetic in every space that I, choose to occupy and be in and reclaim. And I don't know if it's similar for you, kind of looking at that, saying, I said I wanted to do this then, and here we are. And
It is. It is super similar. Look at this. My mother always taught me how to put my stuff away. These are floppy disks. Like, there's poems in here. And even performing in the last 3 years, I started to realize, like saying, because like I said, I have old poems, and a good writer, stuff doesn't get old.
yeah.
We tell a story, and at its worst, it tells the story of that time period. And I found myself on stage, Cafe Frascati in San Jose, and love performing with Mike McGee, and doing pieces where I'm gonna call it a mixed audience. We're understanding elements of hip hop that people didn't understand 15 years ago coming from me.
Right.
I had to ask myself, is it, sometimes it's the times, sometimes, oh, it's the grays in my hair, maybe they weren't ready to hear this young guy speaking about this. Now it sounds like a voice of wisdom,
Right.
versus, you can be on point when you're younger, but when you get older, it starts sounding, like I said, like wisdom, and two, people, we're interesting, as unfortunately a lot of people are passing away. We're interesting when it comes to art and artists, where the person that is no longer here is safer to accept,
Yeah.
and I'll just say, as my youth has dwindled as far as visually, I still, without a mirror, I feel like I'm 16.
Right.
But it's not until I look in the mirror, go, oh, okay, not anymore. Almost 50. Okay. And so I like to utilize what people see. I've learned that as a young black man growing up, and as a black man now, I don't have an issue with how people see me. I can't always change that. I know how I feel, and I can utilize and work with how people view me. When I go into a store when I was younger and I had people follow me around, I'm like, yo, I got the best customer service, because if I need something, they right there. Oh, you, you right there. Well, thank you for keep watching. No, keep watching me. So I feel like we need to. I benefited from understanding that perspective. I'm not going to fight it. I know how you see me. Like for me, I'm a pretty happy, fun-loving guy, but my default face looks pretty serious and stern. So I know that. And knowing that means if I want to get a message across to somebody, I don't have to use a lot of energy to do so. I can just say it, you know, just like talking to kids. Like you can look, I don't need to yell. Just look at you and say, hey, you need to sit down. So
Yeah.
understanding those things, I think is all a part of one's artistry, one's part of one's life. Just understanding you. It doesn't always have to be how you see yourself. It's not always about how you see
Right.
yourself. It's understanding how other people see you. And I don't have to conform to how they see me, but it does benefit me to understand how people see me.
It's almost like a strategizing the signifiers, right? Like you take back the narrative if you want to work with it in that way, with the good, bad, and the ugly. Because when I'm not saying accept it, right? Because I know I walk in the room and it's like I could temper the earrings or the lipstick, what have you, and give off a different signifier in that moment, or I can use it poetically to our collective advantage, right? And there's a nuance there. There's like this very the same way that we string words together. There's something poetic about that,
Yeah.
and about modeling that for other people as a reminder, right? Not as a look at me and do as I do, but like a look. There's so many layers of permission that we can unlock to be free in our everyday. Right? We could have those big conversations, that massive movement that we need, but these are the things we can do in our everyday to stay free.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not quite there, to get ourselves free. And that's so anchored in Prince that I'm like, he ain't perfect, neither am I. And there's so much in the vault of what's unreleased of all of his creative tinkerings that I find hopeful. In that for me, some folks ask, are you afraid that at some point, you're gonna hit this place in your life where you start to feel irrelevant? And I'm like, well, to who? Because I'll always be relevant to my damn self, first of all, right?
Right. First off.
And then the thing you just called out about, you start getting that gray hair, and there's some wisdom about it, and people receive that in a way that always has relevance.
Right. Right. Very necessary. It's interesting. I got invited to a hip hop event in 2016 with my good friend Jeff Turner, and we were in New York, and over 600 battle rap MCs were there. And definitely from the moment I got on the plane in San Francisco, I was questioning my relevancy. Like who, come on, look at me. I'm in my 40s and heading out this way, and what do I have to offer to these individuals? And being me, my story, my longitudinal study from my art, being able to know that I have this art capsulized between floppy disk, notebooks. It's a great thing to see. Your relevancy is who you are. It's like you said, your relevancy starts with you, but then the more we live, the more we give others the permission to live. you
Right.
know, and I'm definitely about being an exemplar, you know. And I've learned a lot through my poetry. I've learned from my pen. I've learned a lot. I try to write as truthful as possible, and you learn from that. Where did I go? Oh, this is how I thought then, and this is where I'm at today. So I'm not ashamed of any of my older writings. You know, they are a piece of a puzzle, you know, and I really appreciate that there's a lot of my writings that I'm like, wow, I was in a great space. Like here's one that I wrote years ago.
Mm.
Um, and it was probably between 94 that I wrote it, and it's entitled "Sleepwalkers," and it
Mm.
was based on me reading Alan Watts because I'm about Eastern philosophy and trying to, think deeply for myself. And so here's this piece. Uh, I spoke to my father the other day, and we shot the shit about this world and its progress. You see, sometimes I think it's a test, the true game of hide and seek. For I am not God, but oftentimes refuse to hear God when he speaks. Better yet, when words are spoken, for God is not he nor she, but life held open. But with this human mind, we often find the urge to see the inside, while the inside's the outside. So for once, let it slide. Now you might be wondering, who am I? I'm an ego, that's who. Egotistic and mystic, and like all of you, talented and gifted. For I am you and you are me, just as love, war all come naturally. So fly high and dig deep. Contemplate death and you'll sleep. You see, it was once said that I wasn't a loud talker, but back then I didn't want to wake the sleepwalkers. Thank you. So that was Sleepwalkers, and I find it, even in reciting that today, it seems so relevant that I'm saying it now, though
Right.
I was saying it at a young 20-year-old, you know, and it was interesting. Now that I'm thinking back, the impact that that poem, it impacted in a different way than it does today. And today it seems more fuller, you know, and that's the beauty of poetry and in writing with an honest pen.
Definitely. And there's something, again, that poem, it's like layers of activation, and even looking at like how pop culture adds layers of transformation to that. And I'm like,
Mhm.
there's this whole the sleepwalkers and what that means and what that will activate for other people that wasn't even present in 94 in the 90s in that way. And it just, again, right, it's like from all of these different layers, and I don't know if you want to call them access points into our poetry, like there is transformation, and it's poetic in the same way that nature can be poetic, right? You might
Yes.
come across an oak tree at some point in your life, you come back and you revisit it. To you, it might look the same, and it'll activate layers of remembrance, but it's transformed.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. I agree. I agree. You bring a great point about that. Like even when we had the whole wake movement, be woke, and it's like enlightenment. You're going to be woke, but you do have to fall asleep, and then you have to be reminded to wake up again. And that's a process in itself. Like you can't stay woke. Like I've tried it as an artist. I've tried staying up late at night. Like I can do this. It's 4 a.m. Nah, I think I better go to sleep now. You know, it's that thing about life. It's that I used to, as a poet, you sometimes as a poet performer, I will say, um, you start to wonder about saying pieces over, or maybe I should write a new one, or
Mhm.
um, but even in this piece that I just spoke of, Sleepwalkers, my father, he's ill at this time. He has cancer,
Mm.
and I spoke. I go to visit him, and I just went to visit him this weekend, and I was telling him about this poem again, like, and it's always because he and I would always have these wonderful in-depth conversations. And so it is very relevant. And I would always, those first lines will always mean something to me, knowing that he introduced me to Eastern philosophy, and knowing that this whole train of thought was sparked by him. And where did I take that train of thought to introduce it to other people and for them to see it? And then I want, young people to say, hey, that was interesting. That was kind of deep. I didn't understand that now. And then I can go, hey, check out Alan Watts, the book, The Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are. That's opened me up to writing that poem. So maybe it'll take you somewhere, I feel as a poet, that's, as an artist, true artist is to inspire and provoke thought, and I feel comfortable with my poetry in doing that. Even when I write about some of the simplest things, I try to put layers in there so that one, I really don't want to waste people's time. So I'm like, if you invest time into listening to my work or reading my work, you can break down things, and I promise you, it's not going to lead you to a dead end. Each line, if you ask me, what did you mean by that? What did you say? It has a true meaning. It will take you a place, and if you need to rewind it, please do so, and break it down even more, so yeah.
And that's the thing about poems in particular, right? And it's like hip hop and songs do this. It's a form of poetry. And then just poetry more generally definitely feels like when I'm putting the pieces together of all of these threads of lines that kind of come to me, I'm being intentional about what I want the folks who come across that particular piece to get out of it as a whole. And then you're very like intentional line by line. And even then, each line by itself is a whole universe of its own poem that you kind of just got to let go of the fact of not everyone's going to get this.
Right.
But when they do, it feels like such a gift to hear it back, right? Be like, they got it. They got that piece, that one line in 4 words.
Yes. It makes me think, and great writers, one of my favorite hip hop artists, and, you take it with a grain of salt, Keith Murray. And he stated in one of his lines, my lines will dawn on you in time like revelations. And it's like, yeah, sometimes it'll hit you later and you'll be like, oh, that's what that was. That's, it's that, and it's interesting for me, I say hip hop. It's such, I'm so at the core and beginning of this. I started off as a b-boy. And so when I speak of hip hop, I'm really like looking at the true writers and the essence of what this was, and not what an industry is thinking and making of it. Like one of my favorite groups is Diggable Planets. And one of the beautiful things is I can look on the back of that album and it looks just like a Prince album. Butterfly, written, produced, arranged, and that was an album that got a Grammy award. And to this day on that album, Femme Fatale is the dopest spoken word recording I have ever heard. And he speaks on that album about having a conversation with a friend of his who was having an abortion. So not only is it a beautifully performed piece, but it has so much content in it. And for that to be on a hip hop album that won a Grammy, I'm like, yes. That's why I made sure that that's one of the albums that I own, is that. And that's what motivated me and motivates me. Is like, I want to write stuff and create stuff like that,
Right.
And like I said, it doubles backs onto Prince. It double backs where you have movement, in his music, you know, um, writing under different characters, under Camille, and his humor. Prince has all of those things, and it's like, wow, if we can try to embrace that. That was one artist that I would have loved to have worked with. And one day I look forward to doing something with some of his music, and I know that if I do, it better be done right.
Right.
It better be done right. Like Prince is very, a purist when it comes to music and doing things the right way. I definitely would want the spirit of Prince to be like, all right, you did a good job. All right,
Right.
right on. So I'm not going to rush to do that, but that is one of the things that I definitely want to do, is to be able to, I'm not going to say recreate, but work with, some of his music and create and make a piece uh, based around that, because he has you thinking about so many things,
Mhm.
God, one of the reasons my record player has a reverse button is so that I can hear what he's saying on the song in reverse. And the ladder, everybody's looking for the ladder. I remember being young. I must say, when I first found Prince, I didn't understand him,
Right.
but I was young. I was 14 years old. I wasn't supposed to understand him. I wasn't supposed to, I felt Darling Nikki was a little crass. I was young,
Mhm.
and getting, like I said, I wasn't supposed to understand it. But as I got caught on to his ballads and started working my way and seeing this individual, I'm like, wow, what do we have here? You know, we have this wonderful artist who has really helped, like I said, the music industry by, you know, calling it out, you know,
Right.
and he was on the right record label, Warner Brothers, to do so. Top level, you look at his first album, he
Right.
was the youngest person to get that much creative control. They didn't tell him what to make, but he had so created so much that he could not put out as many albums as was inside him. And
Right.
that's phenomenal. So much material that he didn't himself. He had to create groups
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
facilitate that creativity.
Right.
That's amazing. Like, they wouldn't take it if I was to say it, but if the Times says it, or if,
There.
Vanity Six says it, it they'll understand it. So that's amazing.
And there's ongoing ripples, right? Intergenerational at this point. And I know when I talked to you about doing this segment and hanging out for a bit, I said could be 20 minutes, it could be an hour, and time kind of has gone by very poetically for me, because I'm like, where
Right.
did that hour go? We're
Yeah.
getting up to our hour, and I'm like, I could sit here talking to you all day about Prince and authenticity and being the owner of your own artistry
Right.
and owning that fully and existing in our everyday in this very conversational way. And it's this interesting hybrid, right? Where it's like work with what you got, but also you better come correct, right? Because Prince is watching, Prince is listening. And there's always kind of that, there is a standard. And I feel like this is something that we have in common, you and I, in terms of, there's value in showing up fully and flawed. And then there's an intentionality behind coming correct and
Right.
using something that you can stand behind and put your name on. And that also has to matter collectively.
Right. It does. It does. It integrity is big, and I think and feel that we are in a space where we can start to exude that integrity if we want. It's easier now. The gatekeepers, like I said, are gone. Really, I can say that regardless of how somebody feels about it. It's true. The gatekeepers are gone, and this is for young artists. Like, you can make whatever you want to make. As a young artist, I used to feel like once again, coming out of hip hop and going into poetry, everybody was talking about the CNN of the streets. I'm like, dude, like we can create our own stories. We don't have to tell what's happening if we don't like it. I can write about the future.
Right.
I can what the future I want to see. So
And I think
it's
in that way, that's enabling possibility, right? And
right.
catalyzing people's own potential. Because I'm like, I'm not going to transform you. I'm inviting you to sit in transformation with yourself. And I'm going to put myself to a certain level of being on display so that it reminds us of our permission that we all
Yeah.
have to be this way. And that integrity, right? Like that's the exact word I was looking for right there. That integrity is important in our artistry, and it permeates everything, which is why, for folks tuning in or catching a poem or hearing you flow in hip hop on stage, there is a, a nuanced difference there with a sense of integrity, not just to ourselves, but it really is about legacy, right? And I'm not saying I'm gonna sell records the same way Prince did, but I'm also not saying I'm not. Like there's a possibility there,
Right.
and something about enabling all of that for me just always seems like magic.
Todo es posible.
Mm-hmm. Todo es posible for sure. But I know I have you here a little over the hour, and I appreciate you flowing with me and taking the time and throwing down a couple of poems. And I did let folks know by way of the banner here that if they want to find you online, they can do so
I appreciate it.
at your website. And I always forget, since we did talk about self promotion, for folks who are trying to find me and come across this somewhere where I didn't park it. Here's how you can find me. And don't ask me why it just got bigger, but it did.
Right.
And I'm gonna put yours back up there for a second, because in addition to the poetry and the albums that are gonna be coming out, you do have quite a bit of performances in your own circuit, and that's the place to stay informed, right?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
All
Yes,
right.
indeed.
Well,
Thank you for the invite. I must say, I appreciate it.
definitely. I was reluctant to ask. I was like, he's not gonna want to come on. And then when you were like, I'm be down to play, and I was like, I'm all over it. Let's do this. And it's a great way to start this particular Monday for me. It's gonna have ripples, and I'll be in touch, because I might be like, hey, consulting fees over here, please help me out, because I've been playing with some lyrics, and everybody's like, but aren't you the shy girl from the east side? You're gonna bust out lyrics. And I'm like, I mean, in the power of Prince, I might. So
There you go. There you go. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
everything is we could. Well, thanks again. And for folks who caught us at the tail end here, you can catch the replay in full from the beginning, and connect to the work here on the link on the screen. And we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks a lot, folks.
Right. And thank you. Have a creative week.
Definitely.